And welcome to the IPLD every 2 week sync. And who's starting off?
I think that's me. So I've got a bunch of stuff to talk about. A quick update on the IPLD reflection stuff. So I refactored the tests to run on both the code gen, which was already happening, and the new stuff, which was a bit of a refactor, trickier than expected, but it's working now. And I'm essentially extending the tests to hammer all the to-dos that I've got in the new IPLD reflection implementation, which is in the bind node package. So that means hitting methods that the existing tests didn't hit, like lookup by segment, lookup by node, some weird stuff around representations and so on. So I plan to do that for another day or so, add a couple more high-level examples. I'll probably polish the API a little bit, and then I'm just going to share it with a bunch of people and say, try it and see what happens. And they're probably going to come back and say it panicked, and then I'm going to fix that. But I think it's going to be a good exercise to see what they think of the API at a first glance. I also filed a bunch of quality of life improvements that I've been thinking about for a while. We did talk about give me a go value for a basic IPLD node a couple of weeks ago. And initially I thought I wouldn't file this, but then I changed my mind again. Because in Dealbot, we did see a few places where we did the work manually for like small lists and things like that. So I think this would be nice. I also think we should have a typed prototype interface type in the schema package, because we have typed node, so you can get the representation out of that. You do not have anything like that for prototypes. If you have a prototype for like a DAC PB node, there's no way to build a representation of it. You have to have the prototype separately. And the CodeGen does provide you both prototypes, but again, you have to grab them separately, which is a bit weird. It's easier if you have the main one to go to the representation one, I would say. And the last one is, I think it would be a little bit nicer to have a basic node chooser, because I've seen a lot of people write this pattern where they layer the choosers, for example, for DAC PB to choose the right prototype for a multi-codec. And that works fine, but then what they write at the bottom as the default case is always the same. It's just return basic node.prototype.any. So I think we could make that a one-liner. It's not super fancy, but I think it would make life a little bit easier. And I don't think there's a problem in encouraging people to do that, because everybody's doing that, and I don't see a reason not to do that. Please shout if you disagree. And then there's two things that are also quality of life improvements, but which are not as easy, so I didn't file them directly. One of them is, can we finish the IPLD schema parsing stuff? Because working through the examples for IPLD node reflection, using IPLD itself gets much easier, but the schema part is still quite verbose and difficult, because you have to wrangle the type system and then generate those stringy definitions and all that. It would be much easier if I just had a file with the schema and just parse that, and it just worked. Especially nowadays, because I could embed that schema into the Go program, right? It would just work. And the other one is for selectors. You have a package to build selectors, and it's quite powerful, but could we just have something that just parses a selector from a string? That could be quite handy. And if you have both parsing and printing, there's a proposal to have text marshallers and text unmarshallers be usable as flags with Go's flag package. So you could make a flag transparently work as a selector, which would be pretty cool. And that's it. Any comments, disagreements, thoughts?
These all generally sound like great quality of life things that I would be very happy to see added.
So if nobody disagrees with the last two, I'm just going to file them as issues. I don't know if the schema parsing stuff is filed as a proper issue.
I don't think it is.
Eric's silence, I'll take that as a yes, as a go ahead. So
go for it. I'm not very masterful of navigating or using GitHub issues, so I tend not to file them unless somebody else chases me, but feel free.
would you like to go next?
Oh yeah. So most of my stuff to report on will be docs and specs consolidation updates again. I think this is cruising in towards the finish line, or at least I'm desperately going to try to make it so. So all of the 3 biggest content repos in the past have now been unified and are in the ancestry of one coherent Git history. The old specs repo, the old docs repo, and the old IPLD/IPLD repo are now all consolidated. I have updated the master branch pointer in the IPLD/IPLD repo to be this new unified history. So everything that was ever in that repo before is still reachable by commit hash. It's all there. And everything in the other 2 repos is now also there. So we now have all this content in one place. The contributor count is, of course, the union of all the contributor counts of these previous repos. And it's nice to see that number be so high. So this is now, I think, pending on doing the DNS update. I would like to launch this and have IPLD.io pointing here very soon. I don't think that the DNS update has quite happened yet. We're waiting for somebody who holds keys to that, but it should be soon. I'm not yet going to move the old docs.ipld.io DNS entry, so that can stay there with the content that's currently there for a while. At some point, though, we should figure out what to do with it. And other content work can continue from here. The finish line that I'm aiming for here is we have more consolidated content than ever before. And when new content is written, we can now make it clear that this is the repo where it goes and make a nice paved road around that area. But there is still definitely to-do blocks in the website too. I'm hoping that sometimes people can see them and jump in, maybe if we are so lucky as to have wonderful contributors out there. Otherwise, I'm going to keep trying to slowly slog through them as time permits too. And yeah, I'll be really excited to make that available.
Wonderful.
Congratulations. Congratulations, Eric. That was a lot of work. And,
Thank you.
Yes. Okay, my update since last I was in one of these meetings. Actually, there's a lot more than this, but this is the stuff I remember from the last 2 weeks and a bit. So I recorded an IPLD module for ResNet Lab, their on tour program. Been working on this for most of the year, just chipping away at the content, but finally, flurry of activity, recorded the final session. Hopefully that's being edited now and they'll publish that. It's good, I think. It's not awesome. It fits in with their content. But I won't be unhappy with it as a introduction to IPLD. But it does, to me anyway, for my purposes, it feels like an iteration towards explainers for what we're doing. So another iteration of learning the best way to frame these things. It was a little bit constrained in that it was, it sort of hinged a bit on IPFS. So it had to be clear about that relationship there. Yeah. Anyway, that's hopefully done and just put aside finally. Did some minor fixes and test additions to GoCar and JSCar just for header detection and version detection, just to make sure that they error correctly in anticipatory prep for car v2, which may be using a special little header pragma thing that should break the old format. And this is just making sure that the older code, if you're still using it without any updates, will tell you probably it doesn't know how to deal with anything but version 1. JS DAG Jose, I did a big update to that a few weeks ago or a month or 2 ago. Just been working with them to get that merged and cleaned up. Dependency updates, did some API cleanup and additions just to make it usable, because I also added some examples just so I could figure it out. And the examples sort of exercise the thing and show you how to use it both in and out of IPFS. Quite interesting, and I think fairly usable. Just, people need a signing or encryption solution for IPLD, then DAG Jose is pretty much all we can offer them at the moment. So, and people are using it, so may as well get it working. There is a Go version of this that apparently is heavily used. This is used in DID stuff that they're doing somewhere. I can't remember the details. And I finally merged the DAG JSON spec cleanup PR that was been sitting waiting to be merged for a while. That was a couple of weeks ago. I merged that. I actually don't know if that made it into your docs yet, Eric, but we probably should get that synchronized. But that cleans up a bunch of outstanding issues, and yeah, got the JavaScript. And actually, along with that, I got a new version of the JavaScript DAG JSON implementation shipped out, which does a lot of fancy stuff. Lost a little bit of performance in the process, but it's nicely spec compliant, and I'm really happy with how like strict it is all around the edges and does all the right things. So, yeah, that's me. Ruben, do you want to go while you're typing?
Yeah, so on my side, a very small update. I basically closed up a pull request, which I opened literally a year ago, to get text, like very rudimentary text pathing into a string of a text path piled into a selector, and then wire this up to Filecoin in the Lotus binary, and actually partial retrievals work with that. It is not pretty, and there were a lot of both not pretty from a UX perspective and not pretty from the implementation perspective, but at least it works. So that's actually a great success. Apparently this is literally the first working prototype of partial retrieval in Filecoin so far. Yeah, I am hoping that we will get a little more agreement within this call on what can we ship as like pieces of what I did as kind of like helper libraries to make both compiling selectors and applying selectors a little bit less painful. That's all I have.
That sounds similar to the issue that Dan suggested he was going to file earlier in this call.
Yep.
Great. We may already have alignment. I think the only thing I've got is the non-ending saga of IPLD prime in IPFS integration continues slowly. We spent another week attempting to understand how the DAG get command works. More proposals for more complicated processes were considered and rejected. The current plan is that we will need it to work sort of like IPFS cat works, where we will not deal with any of this encoding in the encoders library, which was the previous plan. It turns out that encoders thing, as you might specify, while it provides help, which is nice to have, it also happens not in the correct process all the time. It happens in the client process. But we would prefer to use the encoder plugins that are available in the daemon process, probably. That seems more likely to be the expected use case. Because otherwise, right, yeah. Once I said there's multiple processes involved, we all realized this is more complicated and it's painful. There was a proposal of maybe we always have the backing command actually push out some sort of DAG JSON thing, and then we return them into IPLD prime nodes, and then we serialize them with the intended codec closer to the client. That seems really, I don't know, suboptimal, and also means that you could have a codec available on the daemon, but not available on your local codec, and then you couldn't do that, which also seems like it would be not the thing that the user would be expecting. So I think having it be just within the command itself, this command just puts out bytes of whatever the codec encoding of the expected DAG is the simplest thing to explain and try and provide as a service. So that's the direction we're going now. And now we just need to do it, but should be actually simpler code. Cool.
This is just actual bytes to the for the console, not hexadecimal or anything. Okay.
Which may, if your encoding was JSON, happen to just be, nice console happy bytes. But, there's also cases where it'll be arbitrary bytes like CBOR or whatever. And in that case, you better be having the output piped to a file. But that's probably what you're doing if you're outputting CBOR.
It sounds very similar to the discussion that's going on about the gateways at the moment as well. Yeah.
I am not surprised. There seem to be also, I don't know, people staring at this and also staring at some of that gateway set of questions and being like, this current thing is both extremely confusing and not what we want, and also intertwined in such a way that it's not going to be pleasant to remove. So what's the path forward?
I mean, in a way, it's nice that we're finally addressing the DAG-PB lock-in problem. That's really at the heart of this, and it's nice to be doing that, because without doing that,
so this
really
encoding thing is actually not that. This is that there's some attempt at a generic outputting from all IPFS commands that goes through IPFS commands and either gets serialized to JSON over an HTTP API or directly to some other thing and then gets re-put through the commands that does the final encoding. And that's just an artifact purely within how IPFS has structured its potentially two-process daemon and client setup, and is not related to the data model. Apparently, one of the things this has meant is on any IPFS subcommand, you shouldn't return, you return an object, but you should return like a struct of structs, like concrete types, so that the reflection can turn that into JSON and then reserialize it on the other side. With the attempt of being transparent to you, except that if you use interfaces, it stops doing it, apparently. So if you have any just interfaces in your type, you no longer get the recreation when you are on the client side that you didn't realize you might have been in that mode of. And so this is just an IPFS problem, I think, not anything about the underlying DAG-PB data model.
So if I've understood this correctly, there was just a bunch of code that's probably well on in age and is acquiring flavors, and it's too easy to pass structures through it in the Go code, which were not actually well designed or intended for serialization, and then undefined behavior can easily be
there's
written.
a real problem, which is you've got an IPFS daemon and then you've got some other process. And so you need some sort of serialization between these. And if you're saying, great, and now we need to be able to let you encode into JSON or into XML, apparently, maybe you want to do that on, right? They've got an XML codec. We don't have that yet. Maybe you do that on the client side. And also you may want to interface with the daemon over the web. So can we have that same interface be the thing that goes through an HTTP transport to some sort of JavaScript client? So it's that boundary that, I understand, I think, that there are very valid motivations to want to abstract that one level so that you can have these different things that pipe into it. But we have done that in a way that we now want other things that it can't do.
So I also jumped in and added a few more things to the docket that I forgot on the first round. Does anyone want to talk about test fixtures? I'm not sure I do either, but I will make some information available. And if people are interested in it, give me some reactions. I had done a little research on the problem domain of cross-language test fixtures in the past. I think it might be in last week's recording. I don't remember if I mentioned having a prototype solution. I now have a prototype solution. I tried to draft a new format, and I've got a couple of links in our shared notes document here. I've got a gist of what the new format looks like, and right next to that is a link to that same data in JSON. It's selector fixtures. And I guess I would just be interested in people taking a look at this and telling me if it looks crazy or not. The intention was to make something relatively human readable, but also relatively clear for a machine to update. And God have mercy on my soul, somehow also be consistent about line break maintenance, which, man, computers, enough said. So the state of this is that I've made a prototype implementation of something. I hope it's human readable. Opinions may vary. It uses indentation as the process of hitting the sweet spot between, yeah, I know, Will's making faces. It uses indentation as a means of hitting the sweet spot between human readable and can contain any content. There aren't a lot of ways to hit that sweet spot. You basically have escaping or nothing, honestly, right? You have escaping or nothing. And indentation is the only concept of escaping that is trivial to do as a human, because you select a bunch of text and you press tab, right? And you're done. As contrasted with going through the entire thing and like putting slashes. That's somewhat harder to do. Like you can do it with a sed script, but does your editor have a button for that? If it's Emacs, maybe, but like everybody else, probably not. Anyway,
Wait,
I've got a POC of this. I'm not sure if I'm going to push it anywhere. Impressions wanted.
are the tabs actually significant or visual?
There is, in the POC implementation, there are some documents in the README about Postel's principle.
Mm-hmm.
You should use the tabs, or it is not safe for all content, but a tolerant parser may choose to make the tabs optional.
I see. Okay, and your expects are flat, all of them. It's only the selectors that are tabulated. Okay.
Right.
Cool.
So the intent of the format is be human readable while maintaining all the white space and everything else too. And so in this example file, some of the things that make that interesting are this example file contains a bunch of other formats. Some of it's JSON, some of it's not. And so all of that should be maintainable. And yet hopefully the sections between those separate documents should be clearly visually delineated. Hopefully. I don't know.
Have you well, I actually don't know. Do we have equivalents to the equivalent long names for the short commands for the Fs, the little, like where you have F colon.
Oh, we're
F,
talking about selectors now?
Yeah. I'm looking specifically at your examples. Like, do we actually have, because off the top of my head, I actually don't know how to read this myself. I'll have to go and find the schema and so on and so forth. And I remember we had a long version of those. Maybe we could consider using that.
So that was my initial dream a long time ago. We still have some docs in the website now, which are using those long form things, the words in the schema, and are arguably more legible as a result. I'm really not sure if that was a good idea in hindsight. I was hoping that we would rapidly get the tooling relating to schemas to be in such a point of quality where I could say to somebody, okay, take this document with the long names, now run this transform tool and give it the schema file and it'll produce the short names, or go vice versa. And then that would be sufficiently executable and clear to a user that we could actually write docs in either format and say, click a button, here's the flip. But we just haven't gotten there. And so I've become pretty uncomfortable having those longhand things showing up in the examples, because right now, if you plug that into code, does it work? No. And I think that's probably misled more people than it has helped with its relative human legibility, unfortunately. I'd like to, I don't know, maybe get there someday, but these are fixtures that will actually run.
Yeah, the fact that the long names actually do not work, that wasn't apparent to me. So yeah, then
right.
Yeah, that's That's the way to go. Like you want stuff that runs in the examples, obviously.
Yes.
Looks cool other than that.
Sweet. Yeah, I guess I won't expect any feedback synchronously either. This is something that should be weighed carefully. But it's out there now, you know. That's it for me.
I gave my feedback, but I think it's going to depend on the practice, or what it looks like in practice when we wire these things up. I do appreciate the idea of keeping it really simple and then pushing the complexity upstream. Although I do suspect it's inviting more features, but maybe that's in a reasonable process, so that any additional features have to be well justified. Don't know. Sorry, Daniel.
I don't really object to the format. I think it's fine. I think I said this 2 weeks ago. Any format is better than no format, and this certainly seems fine. The first thing I was going to bring up is what Peter brought up, which is why not be strict about at least one leading tab within the content of each file? Because then if you didn't require that, I guess you could have like a tool like GoFumt that rewrites them to have that. But I don't know. I wouldn't want to have inconsistently tabbed files.
Yeah, maybe we should make that a strict rule. There are some comments about that in the README of that POC repo that flag that as a Postel's principle thing. I guess I was actually highly influenced here by Golang's txtar, which has this really intensely provocative comment at the top of its documentation saying, it is impossible to have a file which does not parse as txtar. And I kept going back to that comment and being like, that's a really cool feature. But then, of course, the flip side of that is it really boxes in the format quite a bit, right? It can have all sorts of weird data sections that can be incorrect. And there are many kinds of typos which can produce data that did not parse the way that you intended, even though it did successfully parse. So maybe you're right. Maybe that's not an ideal trade, and it's actually more reasonable to be strict about more of the format.
Lured by elegance.
I mean, yeah, fair. I hadn't thought about that. The other one is, I saw a comment, I think it was in the README. No, it wasn't the markdown file that you wrote in February, where you considered a bunch of options. Mm-hmm. And one of the options you mentioned is txtar plus DAC helpers, which is to say plain txtar, but any file whose file name starts with DAC/, then that will get parsed as something else like DAC JSON.
Yeah, the idea there was when we end up writing fixtures that involve multiple blocks of data, we usually have them addressed by CID links. And so it would be probably useful to have a way to add a bunch of those hunks and maybe have a tool that, like, once you edit the file, you say reprocess this, and it will move those to a hunk that has the name of the CID. Name of the CID that has the CID as its section highlighter. Yeah. And I haven't implemented that feature yet, but I still think it's a good idea. Okay, so the selector example document here doesn't need that feature because it was all single block selectors, but we should have another set of fixtures for multi-block selectors, and then that feature would suddenly become visibly useful.
Because what I was going to ask is, how often is the quoting problem going to happen? Because assuming that it's not going to be common, and I'm willing to bet that's true, then you could just have a similar prefix called quoted / whatever, and then the prefix gets removed, and it removes like a leading whatever quote character you want tab. But then the whole file is still txtar. Because the only thing I don't like about this is that you create your own format, which is still simple, but it's still a new format.
txtar also, as far as I know, only exists in Go, so it's not.
Yeah, that's true.
I mean, admittedly, my POC also only exists in Go so far, but
Well, what is a good example of a multi-block selector?
Let's see. Okay, so there's a link to the JSON form of this fixture, and I think in that same repo you will find some other JSON files that do multi-block selectors already. Like you can easily write these things. The main thing that we've found to be irritating is, as the human authoring these fixtures, you write a bunch of blocks and you fill them with your JSON data or whatever. And then when they're referring to the other blocks, you have to write the CID in there. And you have to like go through a cycle with a tool to tell you what the CID is. And there's no way around that, right? There's no total fix for that other than using like some sort of pointer-based reference and having something read. But we could get an interesting form of halfway there by having a tool that looks at this file and then says, okay, any of these hunks that have like / dag / in the middle, I'm going to hash that content, turn it into a CID, rename the hunk to have that CID as a suffix of its name. And then this would still force you, the human, to go through some cycles where you write content and then you do that to the file, and then it's going to replace the file. And then you're going to have to make sure that your editor picked up the change to the file. And then you can write the next hunk that refers to that one. But it would at least let you have that editing cycle. And I think that would be one of the least crappy user stories that I've yet to think of for this. Like it would let me, I would bind a hotkey to go run this process, right? And then I would expect my editor to update the buffer. And I haven't thought of a better way to do that user story anyway. But that's also something that we could implement agnostic of any format too. That's sort of like slightly tangential.
Any other discussion items?
Hooray, new Matrix channel. If anybody listening to this broadcast hasn't noticed that. A bunch of things happened in the IRC world. I will comment no further on that. But an effect of this is there's now a new Matrix channel, which is going to be the hub for where we do community IRC discussion. Tons of people have found it already, which is very pleasing. The link is on, I believe it's the IPFS.io server and then like pound IPLD and you'll get there. There's also Discord bridges again, which is super nice. Apparently people like Discord. I believe bridging back to IRC again on the new Libera network is planned. I'm not sure if it's happened yet, but it's in the works. So if you haven't found us there, go find us there. It's cool.
By the way, does anybody know if we can set like a regular reminder, like through a bot or something on Matrix to tell people, hey, the bi-weekly call is in 30 minutes or something?
We just get Daniel to do it every 2 weeks. Are bots easy on Matrix? I presume bots are easy on Matrix.
Yeah, I'm sure it is. I was just wondering if anybody had built one.
Maybe that's something we can ask Andy to go and research. Seems to be.
I would actually ask Ollie and Andrew. They're both like heavy into this general automation stuff.
Okay, well, let's end the recording and finish up. Let's see. Okay, thanks everyone for tuning in.